So quick spoiler before I get into this video. If you haven't watched Ted Lasso yet, I would definitely recommend you go and do that before you watch this video, because I'm going to talk about some of the things that happen and how the characters develop and some of the lessons. And if you haven't watched the show, it might not make a lot of sense, but equally I wouldn't want to strip any enjoyment away from you from what is essentially a beautiful TV show. So if you haven't watched it, go do that. But if you have, settle in and we'll get going. So in this video, we're focusing on the second episode, and obviously there's a bit more of a character arc and people are kind of settling into the show. But there are still loads of management lessons that we see from Ted as he develops through this, and also other characters. The first thing we see is Coach Beard stopping Ted walking into traffic, because obviously he's looking the wrong way because he's not used to being in the UK. And what that shows you is sometimes at work you need a good work wife, or someone who's going to course correct you or hold you back from making a mistake, even if you're doing it with kind of really good intentions or without necessarily thinking about it. So sometimes as a manager or a leader it can be quite lonely, or you're quite isolating, because ultimately people are looking for you to have the direction and steer. But trying to find someone in the organisation or outside of work who can be your work wife, someone who can understand what you do and the challenges, but equally be a sounding board and give you that advice or kind of steering when you need it. So it might be a mentor, someone who works in your industry but not necessarily in your team, or someone who works elsewhere in your organisation, so is not directly invested in the day-to-day but understands kind of the framework in which you're operating. And just having someone that you can kind of run some ideas past, if you've got a big decision, talk to them about it. It's just going to get you some counsel, but not someone in your team, because if you do it with someone in your team, they're going to be invested in terms of a particular outcome, but also it's not good for the rest of your team to see that you basically have a closer relationship with one of those team members. So by having a work wife, it's someone who's slightly outside of the team or outside of the direct kind of relationship, but is going to give you someone who you can go to for that sounding board, advice, and to talk through the challenges that you're having. And ultimately they can help you from making a mistake or doing something that's ultimately going to be damaging. With Coach Beard, obviously he is part of the management team and he's part of Ted's coaching staff. So you might be in a situation where you've got an assistant manager or someone who works in your team but is slightly removed from the operational level of the team that you manage. So they're a great person to be that work wife or to be that sounding board, just as we see between Coach Beard and Ted in the programme. So what we see next from Coach Beard and Ted is that they get in early. And I think this is really good as a manager. Win the morning, win the day, but sometimes it will allow you to get on with the priorities that you have before your team gets in and some of the day-to-day kind of operational challenges might occur. If you've got what you need to do first done, then that's going to give you more time and capacity to respond to the challenges of your team and ultimately be more available to your team. I've worked in organisations where perhaps my boss is just comes in, head down, doesn't come up for air, and you feel kind of that you can't really interrupt them or you can't really approach them for a conversation because they're so busy doing their work. Actually, by getting in early and getting kind of your key priorities done, that knows that you're going to be able to respond more effectively to your team. But also you can greet people as they come in and you can see how people come to work, and also you can then notice if people are a bit off or a bit down or whatever, and what challenges they might be having. So just as a manager, it's really good to kind of get in first, get your priorities sorted, and then be able to get on with the rest of the day. One of the recurring themes throughout the programme is of course Ted and his biscuits, and he has a saying which is sweet treats always work, which I really agree with as a manager. I've always, probably wrongly, but I've always brought cake and biscuits and sweet things to team meetings just because I think it lifts the mood slightly. So think about as a manager or a leader, and it may well be in a remote environment that it might be just a gift box that you want to send periodically, maybe at Christmas or Easter, but some of the kind of gesture of that you're taking care of the team, not only on a kind of management level, but it's almost like a human kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs around food and security. So I think food is always a great way to get people together. So maybe a team lunch or a meal out, just that kind of breaking of bread but sharing of treats is going to help build morale within the team. Again, one of the core tenets of the programme, which appears in this episode, is around being a goldfish, and you'll kind of hear that repeated throughout the programme, and it's kind of one of the key takeaways I see online. But being a goldfish just basically means having a 10-second memory. And you might think that's a bad thing as a manager or a leader, and obviously if you completely forgot everything, that would be. But it's more about just not taking things too personally, and moving on quite quickly and being resilient when you face a challenge, or perhaps something doesn't go your way, or perhaps someone in the team is slightly rude to you, or doesn't do quite what you want them to. Although it's important to follow up bad behaviour and make sure that doesn't spread, you equally can't take it too personally. So particularly if you're really invested in your team, you may well get a personal reaction to something that happens or doesn't happen. But remember, Ted, like, be a goldfish, kind of let it wash over you, and then after 10 seconds, move on. Ted introduces the idea of a suggestion box into the dressing room, and of course those of you who watch the episode know that some of those suggestions are more helpful than others, but the idea is that he's opening up those lines of communication, and he's showing his team that he does want to make things better, and he does want to improve their experience, but also is ready to listen to their ideas and their feedback. So by creating that suggestion box, and it wouldn't necessarily have to be as physical or formal as that in your team, but just setting up those lines of communication and showing people that you are interested in their ideas and what they think they could be done better in the team or within the organisation, it's going to help foster that spirit of communication and feedback from your team. And that's just going to make you more well-sighted on actually the challenges, the obstacles, the irritations that they face. But equally, as a manager, it gives you an opportunity, as Ted does, to get something fixed and to demonstrate that you're someone who follows through on those things. So the whole idea of the suggestion box and the actions that you can take to fix some of those issues, some of which you may not even be aware of, is just going to put you as a really effective manager and show the team that you want the best interest for them, but also that you are open to doing things in a different way, which as a leader is really important. One of the common themes that we see throughout the programme is Ted's focus on the importance of team bonding. And sometimes managers under pressure can forget about team morale or the way that the team's operating and focus more on the tasks that need to get done. And I was having a conversation with someone about this the other day, and under pressure people go to one of two places. They either focus on the tasks or the things that need to get done, and in fact some of the personal and the relationship stuff might break down at the cost of getting those tasks done, or people focus on people, and that's what Ted does. So he focuses on bonding, creating strong relationships, knowing that we'll need to cash that in at some point in the future, but he focuses on team bonding and making that a priority as a new manager to help establish himself as a leader in that group. So in the episode we see that Roy's suggestion of fixing the water pressure in the shower is acted upon by Ted, and sometimes it's those small wins that you can do. It's not a major thing, it's not buying a new player, or it's not like overhauling the whole dressing rooms or whatever, or giving everyone a massive pay rise. It's a real small hygiene factor that Ted absolutely has within his gift to get that water pressure fixed. But it's a really important lesson for the team. A, that it shows that feedback is worked upon, and when someone puts something forward, like Ted will go to resolve it. But also it's quite a quick win for you as a new manager to make something that effectively irritates people. You can remove that. So by opening up those suggestion boxes, or whatever your kind of method is, but make sure you act on it, and where you can do those small wins, do them, because then that's going to show the team that you follow through, and ultimately are someone that they can bring problems to. We also see Ted in this episode challenge Jamie around some of his attitudes and the way that he talks to the team. And that's really important, to challenge bad behaviour and call it out. Now Ted does that in a typical Ted way, quite subtly, and not in a very public forum. He does it in a dressing room, he does it rather quietly, and so that not many people can hear. But it's really important as a manager that you start to challenge behaviours that are unhelpful, even when they're not very nice conversations to have. And I think as a manager, having a difficult conversation is probably one of the worst things that you have to do, but the better you can get at having difficult conversations and calling people out, the better it's going to be for the whole team. And we can see throughout the series that Jamie is a bit of an irritant for the rest of the team, and is an agitator, and in effect is really affecting the whole team culture and team attitude and morale by his behaviour, and more importantly his kind of slightly snipey comments. So if you've got someone in your team perhaps who's a bit of a gossip, or a bit of someone who kind of talks negatively about other team members or about the work you do, it's really important that you clamp down quite quickly and show that's not appropriate, because it's not helpful for anyone. And sometimes people don't know they're doing it, or some people it's just their communication style, but obviously in the case of Jamie it's not either of those things. It's probably coming from a different place, but Ted does his best very quickly to start challenging Jamie on his behaviour, and showing him how that's not how he wants the team to act, or not in line with the way that Ted wants to manage the team. So that's, again, as a manager, it's quite difficult to do, but a really important thing that you can do to help your team get a better morale. One of the common motifs or tropes throughout the programme is around like the use of wanker. And that's just a reminder that actually not everyone's going to like you. So sometimes when we get to a new job or a new role or a new company, we might assume that everyone's delighted that we've been appointed and thinks we're the best thing since sliced bread. It's not always going to be the case. And of course, there are going to be some detractors or some people who don't necessarily think that your way is appropriate or your appointment was appropriate or think that someone else should have got the job. So just be aware of when you're starting in a new role, that not everyone's going to be delighted that you're there, or will not warm to you straight away. So Ted takes it with good grace, which is all that you can do, but just be aware that obviously not everyone may be delighted when you get to a new role, and then you're going to have to work sometimes to win people over and bring them with you on the journey. And finally, what Ted does is works out that Jamie is someone who responds well to positive reinforcement. So Ted's taking time to understand Jamie and the way he thinks, and the way he needs to be motivated. And sometimes as a manager, we can have a one-size-fits-all approach to our management and often assume that people want to be managed the way that we want to be managed ourselves. But that's not always the case. There's many different people who need to be managed in different ways. Some people really like critical feedback. Some people only want to hear about the things they can improve. But Jamie's someone who needs positive reinforcement and praise around positive behaviours, and then equally needs to be challenged on the negative behaviours. So Ted shows good understanding about how Jamie thinks, how his mind works, and also what's going to be the most appropriate management technique to get Ted for like where he wants Jamie to be. So it just shows really good insight from Ted and a really good understanding of each individual team member on a personal level. So his approach to say Sam is very different to Jamie, is different to Roy, and so on and so forth. And that's because he treats them as individuals and not as a one-size-fits-all kind of approach. So that's kind of some of the key lessons from episode 2 of Ted Lasso. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the programme, like what you've taken away from it in terms of management or leadership, or how perhaps Ted's inspired you to be a better manager. Leave a comment below and like and subscribe, and then I'll see you in the next video.